So welcome to this session. We are here tonight to discuss the council composition award boundary review for the town that is currently being undertaken. This is the third and final of three information sessions of round one that the town is hosting with the intention to inform residents about this study and the process while also gathering some feedback from the residents. So before we get started, I'll quickly introduce myself and the team. I'm Josh Valenti, a senior project coordinator from the firm called Watson & Associates based out of Toronto. Among other things, Watson is a firm that completes a number of residential population forecasting and demographic analysis. As well, we will see later in this presentation, population growth is a major component when evaluating and are looking at the different ward configurations. But as we also learn, a ward boundary is not just a population allocation exercise, and as we will review other guiding principles later in this presentation, we have a long-standing relationship with Dr. Williams, who is the municipal electoral systems expert and retired professor from the University of Waterloo. Just some housekeeping items for tonight's session. We are being recorded, and we ask that you do please keep your microphones and videos muted or off as we work through the presentation, and we will open it up at the end to any comments or questions as well. So when we start out doing a ward boundary review, there are a few main things that we want to review and discuss. One, why are we doing a ward boundary review? Two, understand the history and legislative framework that guides the process. Three, review the guiding principles that will be utilized to evaluate the current and any proposed alternatives. And four, public participation. And some of that has already started, whether here tonight or last week with the in-person session. We're also available on the town's website. We want to hear from you, so we will go over a few different opportunities at the end of how you and the community can provide their feedback to us beyond just tonight. So a little bit of background here. So starting back in 1991, the town of Innisfil was created, and along with that, a 7-ward system was developed with a mayor and deputy mayor that represented a population of just under 22,000. This system was then in place all the way to 2009, where a slight modification was made to create the current ward system that we see here today. So as outlined on the slide here, the current ward system that has been in place since 2009, we can see the 2021 population here is now above 43,000. So we've doubled that population since the creation of the town in 1991. In addition to that, Bob is now going to take us into a bit of a deeper look into some of these topics, and we'll start off with council composition. Bob?
Thank you, Josh. We hinted at that on the previous slide, but this slide is intended to visualize the current composition of council. And the term composition of council is how this is described in the Ontario Municipal Act. In other words, how big is your council and what are the various parts of that council? Innisfil has a 9-member council. When it was originally amalgamated, it had a 7-member council, but it was expanded to the current structure. So 2 parts to it, if I can put it that way. There is a mayor and a deputy mayor on the town council. They are both elected at large. They are, as well as being members of the town council, are members of the Simcoe County Council. So they have, in a sense, 2 jobs that they are elected to perform, as I said, as mayor and deputy mayor. There are presumably some other internal arrangements for the deputy mayor that may involve covering for the mayor in certain instances or representing the town. But basically, in terms of legislation, as we'll see shortly, that's one part of the structure. The second part are the 7 ward councillors. So the total council is 9 members. The 7 councillors are each elected in a ward, a separate ward geographic area. Again, we will describe that as we move along. And there are variations in these components in other municipalities. But that's basically, it's that part on the right side of the slide that we're going to be talking about. How are those 7 people elected? Now, the other relevant point here is that the position of mayor, and I would also suggest in this case the position of deputy mayor, are treated a bit differently. The legislation does say that the minimum size for a council of a local municipality in Ontario is 5. So we're above that, as long as you've got 5 members, but one of those shall be, in the language of the Act, the head of council. The Municipal Act doesn't refer to them as the mayor. They're listed as the head of council. So one of the five is the head of council. After that, it's open to expansion and possible contraction in some instances. So we'll talk about the legislation in a few moments. So a 9-member council, 2 elected at large, 7 elected in wards. Now I'm going to review a bit of that again in this slide, but the minimum size is 5, so that is not at stake unless we hear from the community that they think 9 is too many, and I have yet to hear that articulated, and we can talk a bit about why shrinking council may not be a good idea. Anyway, the other part of this whole situation of how big is the council is that there's no guidance on this. There are no principles or standards, as I put it here, no formulas to figure out what's the right size of council. What should it be? The practice is essentially locally driven. And as we said earlier, in Innisfil, it's 9 members, 4 above the minimum. At an earlier time, it was 7 members. It's now 9. As we suggest there, that number is one that is right in the middle, if you will, of the situation in Simcoe. A wide variation in the size of the councils. One of them at 10, which is basically New Tecumseh. A couple of them at 5. I think the 2 smallest townships have only 5-member councils, and the others are a mix of 9 and 7 members. So again, there's nothing in legislation that says if your population is whatever, you must have a council of a certain size. It simply says if you've got 5, you can do what you want. And as this chart shows, it does vary, not necessarily even consistently, but it does vary. You'll notice, as I said earlier, New Tecumseh has 10 members, but places that are similar in size, and Innisfil is now at that number, is at 9, as is Bradford, West Gwillimbury, and then the smaller ones tend to be at that other end of the scale. These are, again, local decisions. The province does not say what size is right, what area is right, and nor does it say, and again, we'll touch on this in a moment, whether those people will be elected to council at large or in wards, and we'll expand on that in a few moments. One of the things that's important, I think, to notice in this slide, and we're going to tease this out in a moment, is that out of those members of council, every one of those municipalities has 2 individuals who also serve on Simcoe County Council. So they're, again, overlapping roles. Some individuals doing the 2 jobs, others strictly the local one. So let's talk a little bit about the county situation, which is in the background, I'm going to say, in this. This is why we're calling it county considerations. Simcoe County has also the authority to change the composition of its council. I think at the moment, Simcoe County Council is the largest municipal council in Ontario, 32 members. That is 16 municipalities with 2 representatives each. In the context of municipal review, from time to time, the county has said, maybe we don't need 32 people to make decisions. Maybe we should change it. And the model here is to have what we might call unit representation. Every municipality that we showed up on that previous chart is entitled to the same number of representatives around the table. The goal has been to think about perhaps cutting the council in half and leaving each municipality with only 1 representative. Now, clearly, if that happened, it would have a ripple effect on Innisfil's own council composition. But for the moment, this has not happened. It's been debated 2 or 3 rounds. I've notes on it somewhere about how often it's happened, but and it was also brought into play before the last election, when the province appointed 2 individuals to review or regional councils and the county of Simcoe related to these kinds of questions. Those two individuals, Ken Sealing and Michael Fenn, produced a report which addressed some of these concerns, but we don't know what they recommended because the province accepted the report and promptly put it under wraps, and it has never been released. We don't know whether county council was going to be changed at that time or not. So it stays at two representatives, again, a mayor and a deputy mayor for Innisfil. After that last election, province again said, oh, we're going to look at the regions and Simcoe, and we're going to appoint facilitators to review them. Well, that didn't happen either. Until late in 2023, the province gave the whole idea of reviewing governance in the regions and the Simcoe to the Legislative Assembly's Standing Committee on Heritage, Infrastructure, and Cultural Policy. So that committee has been meeting from time to time in locations across the province, hearing from individuals and municipalities who wish to comment on the possibility of a change of governance. And again, we don't know anything about those decisions. In fact, I don't think it has reached a decision, frankly. And that's a bit of a concern because we're getting close to a deadline for determining the structure of governance, but that's an editorial comment, so I'll just leave that for the moment. But it's in the background. And so the point at the bottom of the slide, the one that's underlined, is that the review does not pertain directly to what we're going to be doing. We're basically going to operate on the assumption that there will be no change in Simcoe County representation. But if it does happen, we may have to circle around and deal with some of this again. But again, it's uncertain. It's out there. There are some questions about whether the deputy mayor position would still be necessary, but we don't know. It is in the mix, as we saw earlier. It's one of the parts of the council structure, but it may change sometime later this year. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. So we'll park that one for a moment. Again, I've alluded to this already. The Municipal Act is the document that sets out how these questions can be reviewed. And it's both the composition of council, that is, how many elected officials, and how they are to be elected. Like other parts of this discussion, the province doesn't really tell you anything about those questions I've already suggested. The power to define the size of the council belongs to the municipality. As long as you've got 5, that's all the act says. You can change it. Okay, 5 is it. The act also says the lower tier municipality can determine how the council will be elected, again, with the exception of the mayor. A mayor must be elected at large. After that, you can elect them in wards or at large. As I've just suggested, in Innisfil, one of the positions is elected at large, namely the deputy mayor. The others are elected in wards. There are other situations where there are no at-large elections and everyone's in wards, or vice versa, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So the third power under the Act, a different part of the Act, is that the council has the authority by bylaw, and the phrase is to divide or redivide the municipality into wards or dissolve the existing wards. So working from the first part, if there are no wards, and we saw on the list there are a number of municipalities in Simcoe County with no wards, councils in those places could decide to establish a ward system. So you can go from no wards to wards. To take the other end, if you've got wards, council can also say, let's have none. Let's eliminate the wards and go to an at-large system. The part in the middle is where we are. We're talking about redividing the municipality into wards. There are wards. We're going to look at whether those can be changed. So those are the 3 parts of that on a kind of a continuum. Create them where there aren't any, redivide them, or eliminate them altogether. But as we've suggested already a couple of times on the right side of the slide, there's no schedule for this. There is no requirement that this be done on any kind of set timetable. There's no standardized process about how you do that, what you take into account. As this suggests, there are no criteria that say electoral reviews should be conducted by external consultants like us. They should be conducted by staff. Nothing of that sort is out there. The powers are there, but how you do it is that first bullet. Each municipality must set its own terms, its own, in other words, what are we going to look at? What are we going to take into account? That's what we mean by parameters. By the guiding principles, what would a good system look like? What do we want to try to address? That is part of what we are working with, having these points been set up for Innisfil itself. And the review, though, is not that you're making it up. You're not just making it up as you go along or creating it from nothing. Reviews and clerks are very keen to make sure that they understand what's going on, and they look to one another. And we look at what are the established procedures and principles. We ourselves on the consultant team look to the examples of other municipalities. We sometimes assist in creating those procedures and principles, but we frame the review around these established procedures and principles that we draw from other examples and from decisions reached either by an Ontario regulatory agency. Now it's actually now the Ontario Land Tribunal, previously the Ontario Municipal Board, or by judicial review ruling. So it's a process that has a procedure and an established process that we will spell out in a few minutes. And when I say each municipality must set its own terms, one of the things that is important in Innisfil was the creation or the appointment of what's called a ward boundary review ad hoc committee, which is a committee composed of 5 citizens appointed by council, and individuals could apply to serve on that. And they were selected on the basis of their relevant experience at the municipal level, their expertise of various kinds, and their interest related to municipal representation. So that body is a distinctive part of the process here in Innisfil, and it is not a practice that's necessarily found elsewhere, but is one that will frame up what we're going to be doing in this review. So let me just talk quickly about that body. In the next slide, we've got a little bit of further thought about it, and I want to be clear on a couple of points that the consultant team will work at arm's length from the ad hoc committee and from council and staff. In other words, this is not an inside job. This is not a process that is basically run by council. For example, the famous term gerrymander would be a council basically draws the lines. That's not what happens here. They have to approve it, but they don't draw the lines. The consultant team will be doing that, having listened to and heard, gathered information from those parties, but we are the ones who are doing the bulk of the review, and we'll tease that out in a moment. So part of our process, again, a process that we have used in other instances. So that's the practice, that's the direction we're going. We interviewed all the members of the ad hoc committee. We interviewed all the members of council as part of what we're referring here to as information gathering. What is Innisfil as a community about? Where are the major communities of interest? What is the experience of running a municipality with a council of 9 members? What are the things that work and don't work in the present structure of the municipality? That came from, if you will, people with experience in it, providing insight to it. It's what I refer to as information gathering, intelligence gathering. Help us understand your community. From that information, the consultant team will develop a report on ward boundary options. We will not come back with one suggestion. We will look at some options, and those options will be taken to the community in a few weeks' time, and Josh will speak to that in a few minutes. We will develop some options, and eventually some recommendations for the ad hoc committee to vet before making recommendations to council. In other words, they will give us further insight into the ideas that we've come up with before we take that to council. Part of this could be summarized as saying we don't want any surprises. We don't want the decision makers to suddenly find they're being asked to approve a proposal that they've never seen. It's a process of helping us to do a good job and keeping the community in touch with what we're doing. The goal is to ensure boundaries that provide fair representation, and we'll come to that in a moment. So again, in the end, council is the body that makes the decision. It has the authority under provincial legislation to modify the size of council and the electoral arrangements themselves that I've just talked about: divide, redivide, or dissolve the ward. So eventually what we're taking this to is council for that final decision. Talking too much here already. All right. So in the next slide, we will just talk a little bit about that. May use these terms already, and for most of you, these may not require explanation, but just to be make sure we're all on the same page, let's just be quickly summarize the difference between a ward system or a no ward system, which is referred to in popular terms as an at-large system. The Municipal Act describes that as a general vote system. So no wards, there's three different labels: no wards, at large, or general vote. But the key point here is that the two systems have different attributes. And as we saw in that list in Simcoe County, in some places there are wards, and they are a system in which the councilors are elected in specific geographic areas, much the same as members of parliament or members of the provincial parliament are elected in specific areas. Constituencies at that level, wards at the local level. Councilors then are candidates in a limited area, which means the choices available to voters is limited. My sense, it's clearer. You've got to pick one person out of presumably a modest number of candidates, but the responsibility for you as a voter is clearer. I'm picking one person to represent my ward. Those wards, of course, should reflect the population distribution and the community identities across the municipality. That last part is what we're trying to address in this review. So a ward system is about trying to capture the distribution of population, the distinctiveness of the communities in areas to elect one councillor. When there are no wards, everybody's elected on the same basis. By that, I mean the town itself becomes one constituency, not electing one person, but electing 7 people. So it becomes a more complicated process in my mind. If you want to be successful, you're going to have to campaign across the whole municipality. You're going to have to try to represent all of those parts of Innisfil when you are elected. You will not be the voice of, let's say, rural Innisfil. You'll not be the voice of Lefroy. You will be the voice of everybody. And everybody will be the voice of everybody, if I can put it that way. So there is no sense that you have your counselor. Your counselor is everybody. And in some ways that becomes nobody. We can talk about that later if you like. But it becomes a very complicated relationship, which is part of representation that we'll touch on in a moment. So for some people, the advantage is I can vote for anybody. If the people running in my ward are not as good as the ones running in another ward, I can't vote for them in a ward system. Here, I can vote for everybody. The flip side is once that person is elected, they will have to deal with everybody. And we'll see what that means in a numerical sense in 2 or 3 slides from now. The long and the short of it is where in the award system, you might have a couple of thousand, maybe 3,000 constituents. In an at-large general system, you've got 43,000 people who could conceivably contact you as their representative. Okay, so that's an option again that councils have to have wards or no wards. Our view, and I think we're happy to hear if there are people in the community who believe that the wards are not a good idea, please say so. But we're going to work on the assumption for the moment that a ward system is the best direction for Innisfil to go. Unless we're disabused of that notion, that's the direction we want to go. We'll change it if that's what we hear. We're going to assume there are wards. But wards are, again, not just arbitrary lines. They're not just random collections of voters across the municipality. The system is based on a number of what we call guiding principles or core principles. And that's what we bring to this exercise. What does a ward look like? A good ward look like? What does a good ward system try to capture and reflect at election time and through the course of the life of a council? The first principle we look for is representation by population, sometimes referred to as population parity, equality. Try to find a way to design wards that are roughly equal in population to one another. And we can see some of the limitations of that a little later on. A ward, the relationship between the constituent and the councillor and vice versa is very different if the ward has 4,000 people than if it has 2,000 people. So we want to try to bring them as close as we can to balance, recognizing that a little bit of flexibility is often necessary because of these other principles. So the goal is to get things roughly equal, parity. The second principle here is the representation of communities of interest. And again, in the experience of most of you in Innisfil, you would know that the community of interest, for example, focused in Lefroy is different than Stroud. They have a different, it's a different kind of demographic, a different kind of community life, a different kind of economic activity, a different kind of pattern of settlement. And that varies again, whether we now look at Friday Harbor, Cookstown, whatever. Wards should somehow take account of the fact that Innisfil has these different communities, neighborhoods, communities of interest, and the ward should be able to capture those with the idea that a ward is not composed of a whole bunch of different perspectives that have nothing to do with each other, that are in a sense competing with each other for the ear of an elected official. We'll never get it perfect, but our goal is to try to create what we might call coherent groupings of communities to draw the wards on that basis. The third one goes back to population. If the first one is basically to say what is population parity in 2024, we also need to think about what it might look like in 28 or even further out, because we don't do this exercise after every election. We know, and Innisfil is a very important example that we know growth is coming. We know some of it is going to be very significant. We know that most of it is going to be concentrated in some areas and not in others, and it largely to do with servicing capacity and so forth. You're going to end up with parts of Innisfil that have far more people in 4 years' time than they do now. And one of the things that happens in a successful ward system is the anticipation of that growth and where it's going to happen. The fourth principle talks about physical and natural boundaries. An ideal situation would be a ward boundary that's easily identifiable. It's not just going to slip up beside some person's house and one house on the street is in one ward and another and the neighbor is in another ward. We need to find boundaries that are identifiable and may in fact already serve to pick up on the second point, to serve to divide one part of the community for another. In Innisfil's case, we have not yet come across significant natural boundaries If you go to Hamilton, for example, you've got the mountain. If you go to other communities, you've got, for example, rivers or valleys. You've got areas that are easily distinguishable from one another. So that's not quite as easy to pin down, but it's part of the mix. So where we're going with all of that is that a successful ward system takes into account those four principles with the idea that the proper balance, the correct balance, the successful balance will lead to what we call effective representation. This is a concept that comes out of an important judicial decision back in 1971 dealing with electoral boundaries. It's referred to as the Carter decision. And in the judgment written by Justice Beverly McLaughlin, that was before she became Chief Justice, she talked about electoral boundaries are about equality, but also about effective representation. Why do you vote? You're voting to elect someone to represent you in the decision-making body. And if that area that's electing that person, as I said earlier, is a mishmash of places that have nothing to do with each other, or one is 3 times as big as the other, that's not effective representation. But it's not just one factor, it's the blending of those. And again, I'll jump ahead. We would be unlikely to ever have a system that perfectly reflects all 4 of those principles. They're going to have to be traded off a little bit, weighed up one way or the other, and just to make them fit together with that overall goal. And as well, some of the scenarios we talked earlier about developing options, it's possible that we could come up with an option that is very, very close to population parity and pays a little less attention to the other factors. And that may be one that has appeal. Conversely, it may be the principle 3, the growth priority. We may find that an option that says, okay, things are going to stay a little bit unbalanced now, but within 3-4 years' time, you're going to get a lot better balance than you've got. And maybe that's a better way to go than to try to keep it unbalanced in the meantime. An important decision related to ward boundaries in the city of Toronto before the council was chopped in half, another story. That review was basic on the premise that you grow into parity rather than growing away from parity. And that again would be an option that would probably be different than one that puts an emphasis on the first principle. So again, what we're looking at is a mixture of various perspectives that we would put together to create an option for electing members of council in future elections in Innisfil. What we will be doing, of course, is starting with these principles and applying them to your current system. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, what are we trying to figure out? And that's where I'm going with here. You've got a system, you've got a structure with nine members, 7 wards. Does it serve the citizens of Innisfil well? Does it meet these principles that we've just talked about? And if not, where is it deficient? Where are the shortcomings? Where are the weaknesses? What could be changed to help us achieve a better balance? As we said just in the second part there, does the present structure provide fair and effective representation? And if not, would an alternative provide better representation? And if so, what might that look like? And that takes us into part of it, our own analysis, but also a much more significant part of that will be what residents of Innisfil feel about the current system and where they think it is working well and where they think it might need to change. That's part of our review process. I'm going to turn things back to Josh at this point to walk you through that.
Great, thanks, Bob. So just a quick walkthrough of the process. So on this slide here, we have it broken down into 2 phases, the top and the bottom phase. So phase 1 at the top, phase 2 at the bottom. And currently we're here in task 5, the first round of public engagement. And what we've seen to date is exactly what Bob has kind of walked us through, how we got here, the information gathering. He's connected with both council and the committee members to get an understanding of the background and how we ended up in Innisfil where we are today. And following this session of task 5, we jump into task 6 through 10. And in that phase 2 scenario, we start to look at different alternatives if needed. If the current ward system is not as effective as we feel it could be, we are starting to develop and present these preliminary opportunities, which you can see in task 8 as our second round of engagement in late summer, early fall there. We are coming back out to the community to present these preliminary ward boundary alternatives based on the feedback that we've received through phase 1. Following task 8, we are spending the early fall there finalizing those alternatives. And again, to kind of report back to what Bob has been saying, we are preparing council and providing a recommendation for the end of November here on an alternative scenario that could arise from the review. So Bob kind of walked us through the how, the what, and now we're kind of getting into the why. So why are we doing a council composition and ward boundary review? Well, really it's to prepare Innisfil Council to make a decision on whether to maintain the existing ward and council structure or to adopt an alternative. And using those guiding principles really as our criteria to determine such a evaluation. Bob, you got something there?
Can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah.
This is important that it's possible for council after all of this to say, we don't want to change. It's not that they have to change. That's what we said earlier. We're giving them a chance to review it and to decide whether the current structure is still appropriate for a municipality twice the size of the one when it was imposed. So again, it's not to say there must be a change, but this is the opportunity to look at the strengths and weaknesses and to consider the possibility of making a change. Thanks.
Great, Bob. And that leads us right into the next one of really the objective is to develop a clear understanding of the present system, including its origins and operations, and evaluate that based on both its strengths and its weaknesses through those identified guiding principles. And all said and done, can we develop a plausible alternatives to the present electoral structure through an appropriate consultation process to ensure that, again, we meet effective representation moving for now and expanding out into the future. So this slide here has a number of different things. We see the existing ward structure here on the left-hand side. Again, 7 wards. As we can see here, 6 are kind of have a waterfront opportunity or waterfront section to those wards, while Ward 1 is strictly a inland ward there. We also can see that there's a vast varying degree of geographic size in these wards. Wards 1 and 7 are of greater magnitude, while wards 2 through 6 are quite smaller, but also quite more dense. And we can see that in both the 2016 and the 2021 population charts on the right-hand side, with Ward 7 being over 100 square kilometers large in 2021 with a population of just over 6,200 people. While we look at Wards 3, which is quite small, under 5 square kilometers, but upwards of almost 10,000 people as well. So vastly different wards geographically and from a population perspective, but also from a community of interest. We can see here that Wards 7 and Wards 2 do split Lefroy in half. They both have a portion of Lefroy. You can see there between the orange and the blue lines of that community of interest is divided into 2 wards. When we look at the population, as Bobby alluded to, we do have somewhat of a criteria of that 25% range. And as we can see here, in 2021, the population of Innisfil was just over 43,000. It was 43,326. And really the optimal or the average ward size, if you take that 43,000 and divide it by 7, is about 6,100. So using that as our optimal population range for each of these wards, we've identified the variance away from that, being within 5% being those green highlighted blocks, between 5 and 25% being the light pink blocks, and the ones that are outside of that 25% range, we can see as those darker red OR plus blocks on the far right-hand column. And as we can see, 4 of the 7 wards currently fall outside of that 25% range. 2 do fall within that 5% optimal range, but there is 4 outside of that. And with growth continued to expected to develop in these similar areas that we're already seeing these discrepancies in populations, those will only exacerbate the situation and continue to grow outside of that optimized or acceptable population range of 25%. Bob, was there anything you wanted to add on this slide?
No, I don't think so, Josh. Point two is, I guess the only other thing is, as you just said, the areas that are already heavily populated are going to get bigger. So you can't just say, well, when the growth happens, it'll all balance out. We know it won't. So if you did nothing, not only would you not have parity now, you would not have parity later. It will simply become worse. And the assumption there is that, of course, population parity matters. If you don't think it matters, then you've got this very strange combination of wards that have a lot of population and they get bigger over time.
Great. So moving along into the public consultation process. So through this session and beyond, there is a kind of a system set up to monitor and review the municipal electoral system that it should be subject to a public consultation process to ensure the legitimacy and the recommendations placed before council. And we're doing this in a few different ways. One, through these virtual engagement sessions. We had an in-person open house last week, but we are also looking beyond just these sessions. We do have online and print engagement materials via the website and social media platforms. We do have a survey that we do encourage everyone on the call here, and please share the survey with your family, friends, and neighbors and loved ones as well. All this is going back into providing us, the consultant team, feedback to help us develop these preliminary alternatives, which we'll then again bring out to the public again for round 2 and receive more feedback on that in hopes of we can get a recommendation that is, to the point of this slide, legitimate from the perspective of the community itself as well. So just a quick insight into what the website looks like. On the left-hand side, we do have a screen capture. There is a variety of materials. There is background reports. There is a series of these reports that really kind of dive into some of the deeper concepts of what Bob has referred and reflected on today. But there is, again, some of those engagement materials, whether it's a whiteboard video, a little information tidbit, recordings of tonight's sessions, but also links to those surveys where you can provide additional feedback beyond just today's conversation. All with the hopes and understanding that your contribution to this review is important. So please read those materials on the website to better understand the issues and considerations. Be willing to ask questions both tonight, online, and when we come back in round 2. But most importantly, for this session, please follow up and complete that survey on that website. And the website is at the bottom of the page here. It is getinvolvedinnisfil.ca/ward review. Lots of good information on there for you to share and review in addition to tonight's session. Project next steps. So based on the feedback from this round of public consultation, kind of already alluded to this, but we will be preparing alternative ward designs over the summer months and come back out in August and September to present those to the public to gain some feedback on those. From those sessions, we will then be making a recommendation to the ad hoc committee, as Bob mentioned, really for a ward structure that will accommodate growth in population for the next 2 municipal elections in 2026, 2030, but beyond that as well, if feasible, where we see fit. And not just kind of relating to the population, but really the effective representation of the community based on those guiding principles that we've discussed. And with all that being said, if the council does believe there is a better alternative out there, they can enact a new bylaw representing the new boundaries at a later date following the adoption of those new boundaries.
I could just jump in quickly.
Yeah.
Just a quick one, Josh. That a bylaw that would implement a change is open to appeal. This is one of the reasons we want to be very careful that we've taken into account the features of the community, that it is a combination of wards that meet those principles, so that if in fact there is an objection and somebody wants to appeal that, the town has solid grounds for endorsing the choice that it made. So that's been in the background to all of this, that it is council's choice, but it is open to an appeal. And our goal is to try to make sure that it is not something that people feel needs to be appealed. Charles.
Great, thanks. And Bob mentioned earlier on that we do really want to kind of engage and keep the council and the committee informed throughout this process. So we do have another council committee workshop set for April 30th. So that is next week. And the intention for that workshop really is to review the public engagement that we've seen through round one, discuss the current boundaries, what does and does not work, and also review that process high level with them of where we are today and where and what they can expect to come. And beyond that, hear their feedback for them to provide input and background on the current systems or any things they see that may fit for the preliminary option development stage, which we will then bring back to, again, the public in late summer, early fall here. So this really rounds out our portion of the presentation. We can now open it up the floor to any comments, questions, concerns. If you do feel you want to have a conversation, feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself, and the floor is yours. And I see Karen, your hand popped up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I did attend the in-person session at the library last week, and I'm going to reiterate the comment that I made. Oh, start my video? Sure. There, okay. I will repeat the comment that I made then, and that is that I am concerned that discussions about future populations and the town's strategic plan are not brought into this. It's all fine and well to look at historical data, but we know that the town is set for huge growth. We know that the town has been given very aggressive housing targets by the province, which it has agreed to. So for me, any discussion about setting ward boundaries needs to include a look at what the town is planning through its strategic plan and what the population growth expectations actually are.
Yeah, sorry, I was finding my unmute button. Yeah, thanks for that, Karen. And that's exactly why we have, I'll say, the Watson team as part of this team. Watson is a renowned expert in that field of population growth. And that is part of our next steps, is we are looking out, again, as mandated by this the process, we are looking out at least until 2030 and preferably beyond. So we usually do look out that 10-year horizon and develop a growth forecast. And then when we do create these preliminary options, as we can see on the screen, number 3, one of those guiding principles is population and electoral trends. And to your point, we are going to be looking ahead. And in one option that we may come up with, it may be favorable to future population growth. In another option, as Bob mentioned, it may be relating to catching up or communities of interest. So these are all one of those areas that there may be some push and pulls of what works from a population perspective now might not work from a future population growth, and we will try to balance those out the best we can in each of these options, again, to have that effective representation.
So when might we expect to see that data included in your discussions?
So that'll all be part of that late summer, early fall discussions. When we come back out to the public with actual options, we will also have those growth numbers involved in that.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
And if I could just add a couple of comments, this is exactly what the Watson team will bring to this. We will rely on as much information as we can as an official information. It's not just guesswork. It's not just making up numbers. It will have to be driven by that information that we get from the town, from the county, wherever it can come, and it will be folded into this process of anticipating where growth will happen. And Josh alluded to a point a moment ago. I'll just repeat it again. As I said, federal constituencies are reviewed regularly, but they are essentially about catching up. If you're familiar with that process, they follow each census. So once the census numbers are out, seats in the House of Commons are reviewed to catch up from one census to the next. And that would be representation by population in this scenario. Catch up to where you were in this case in what 2009, whatever it was. Catch up to that. This proposal or this project rather says catching up is not good enough. We need to think about where we're going to go, and we have information that we believe can serve that purpose, cautious or otherwise, we'll see, but would take us forward so that we can say we'll grow into parity where we know that development is going to happen. And again, we know what's going to drive it. Access to service, things of that sort will drive that development. We can anticipate where it's going to be, which the federal process never looks at. It's only about catching up. This will be will presumably offer alternatives that take that into account, because if we just merely catch up, that balance will be out of date within a very short time. So we can't even allow that to be the only factor.
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Karen. Was there any other questions or comments from the group here? Awesome. Well, appreciate everyone's time. Again, now this concludes the round one engagement sessions. But feel free again and encouraged to jump back onto that town website. We can see here on the bottom. Get involved innisfil.ca/ward review for further information. And as the process continues, that website will be updated with those preliminary options come late summer here. So again, thanks everyone for your time and have a good evening.